Hey guys, this is Jan for Chess24, and in this video I'm going to take a look at the most interesting game from the first day of quarterfinals in the FIDE World Cup. We only have strong players above 2700 left, and we're gonna take a look at the matchup between Pavel Eljanov from Ukraine and Hikaru Nakamura from the United States of America. Here we get a picture of the players. I can almost not see myself anymore. Anyway, Nakamura with the black pieces needs no introduction. The number 2 in the world facing the very strong Ukrainian player Pavel Eljanov, steadily above 2700. Less known and hasn't played that many super tournaments, but a very experienced fighter. Former Olympic champion with Ukraine. So a worthy opponent for everyone. And we do have Eljanov with the white pieces going for his favorite move, 1d4. And Nakamura has decided to play it solidly in this one. We know Nakamura is capable of going for the King's Indian, but in the World Cup, where a loss is very hard to make up with a format of only 2 game matches, most players prefer to play it a bit safer with black. c4, e6, g3, Eljanov a big specialist on the Catalan. An opening I know a little something about as well. I've recently been studying it for my black repertoire series against d4 on Chess24. And I've recommended the same line played by Nakamura, the main line nowadays, bishop e7 and castles, in my opinion, the soundest approach. Here after castles, d takes c4, all of this is still very much mainline territory, queen c2, a6. And the trendy move nowadays is a4, the move played by Eljanov. The line with queen takes c4, b5, queen c2, bishop b7 has fallen a bit out of fashion. For details, once again, I have to refer you to my upcoming series. So a4, intending to stop black from going b5, and black develops the bishop, goes bishop d7, planning to put it on c6 to neutralize the white bishop on this long diagonal. Queen takes c4, bishop c6, all of this well-known stuff. Here bishop f4 used to be all the rage at top level until very recently, but the fashion has shifted a little bit and white now tries his luck with bishop g5 more often than not. Bishop g5, intending in some lines to advantageously exchange on f6, but mainly making a good development move. And the choice is between bishop f4 and bishop g5, because one little known trick here is that knight c3 is no good because of b5, a takes b, a takes b, and all of a sudden white drops a rook, so you don't want to do that. Instead, bishop g5, players keep going along the main theoretical path, bishop d5, and once again they follow the latest fashion with the move queen c2 here. Queen d3 is a bit more popular, but then after c5, looks like black is doing all right. Queen to c2, directed against c5, but white has to find a square for that queen because black keeps harassing it with bishop e4. And here the trendy line is the move queen d1, which we've seen in a lot of recent games. Even a game by Nakamura himself with white against Vichy Anand, which he managed to win after c5. But Eljanov chooses a different square for his queen. He puts it on c1, directed against c5. The problem is from c1 the queen does not cover the d4 pawn, and it might end up being a little passive in some lines, but black has to find a different plan than c5. Nakamura goes for the move h6, still well-known theory, forcing white to exchange here, bishop takes, and rook to d1, played by Eljanov, keeping his options open with his knight if he wants to go to d2 or to c3. Now black plays another typical plan. Since he's deprived of c5, he decides to go for a5, fixing white's pawns on the queen side and planning to get this knight out via a6 and hopefully b4. All of this well known still, knight bd2, arguably more critical than knight c3. If knight c3, black's easiest bet would be just to take, go c6, then bring the knight out and no problems. Knight bd2 was played, and here Nakamura plays a very ambitious move, which I have my doubts about. I believe Eljanov expressed after the game he didn't think it was very good. He goes for the move bishop to h7. And actually, with my goldfish memory, I have to check what I did recommend here, if I did recommend this line at all. I do believe the soundest approach, even in this position after knight bd2, is to just take on f3. If the knight takes back, then once again you go c6, go knight a6, knight b4. And it looks to me like black is reasonably solid. Maybe bishop takes f3, c6, and knight b3, like in the game, is a more ambitious approach, but also here after knight a6. I do believe that black is okay, But for details, once again, I have to refer you to my series, which I should really recheck myself. Nakamura decides to keep the bishop, which is, an ambitious move. I do like my 2 bishops. The question is if this bishop can influence the game from h7 or if it's going to be a spectator. At the moment, it's good that it got out of the pawn chain and to more active destination, but it might be missed defending the queen side as well. And Eljanov wastes no time attacking. That goes knight b3, very strong move. Knight c4 might look more natural, but the c5 square is really where it's at for the white knight, and that's where it's headed. c6, and now another very strong move, which shows the class of Pavel Eljanov. He understands that black wants to go knight a6, followed by knight to b4. If you immediately went knight c5, then black would just defend, and there's nothing much he can do about knight a6 next. So Eljanov takes measures against this knight coming out, goes for the move queen to c3. Just a prophylactic move, because now knight a6 is no longer possible since the a5 pawn would drop. This is a very clever idea, and Nakamura plays a natural move. I'm not sure which move to criticize here. I believe this whole setup might be slightly dubious. He plays bishop e7, preparing to go bishop b4 and then knight to a6 if it's needed. If he were to play, for example, queen c7, hoping to transpose after knight c5, knight a6, white will probably go knight e5, keep the pressure up, and still not permit this poor knight on b8 to come out. Therefore, bishop e7, now is the time to jump to c5, queen c7, and knight to e5. White activates his army to the maximum, and black faces a question if he should go knight a6 here or not. He does so in the game. It's the principal move. It's what you've been working on getting in with black, but I'm not sure if it's sound. A more passive approach, but maybe sounder approach, would be to play a waiting move like rook d8, and depending what white does, rook ac1 for example looks natural. Then just take this knight on c5, and you might be slightly worse after d takes c5, knight a6, but nothing too serious, so this position still looks quite playable, while knight a6 played in the game forces white's hand. Apologies for me forcing my voice. If white continues quietly, he really has nothing to write home about. Let's say rook c1, then black just takes on c5, d takes c, and rook a d8, and would be in excellent shape. So you gotta do something, and Eljanov does strike while the iron is hot. After knight to a6, he does go for knight takes b7. Not really a sacrifice, because after queen takes b7, bishop takes c6, it becomes clear what white is up to. He wants to exchange his 2 pieces for 2 pawns, which just disappeared, and a rook, which depending on the situation can be material advantage, doesn't necessarily have to be. The pawn on a5 could be a target as well. And here, hard to say, but I believe that Nakamura might have misjudged the position with his next move, the move queen c7. The point is, after queen c7, a queen exchange is unavoidable. That's what happens in the game. Bishop a8, queen c3, bc, rook takes a8. But in an endgame, a rook and 2 pawns tend to be stronger than 2 pieces. Therefore, with the queens off the board, I do believe this was very favorable for Eljanov, and I do believe that Nakamura should have kept the queens on the board, even at the cost of a 3rd pawn. And of course, this is also indicated by the powerful computer, so it's not exactly my genius evaluation, but yeah, just the best moves. Queen a7, bishop a8, queen a8. Now after queen takes a5, white gains the 3rd pawn. Rook and 3 pawns tend to be a lot of material for 2 pieces, but here the game still continues. After rook to b8, it's not so easy for white to mobilize his pawns on the queen side, and with queens on the board, you could even dream of activating your pieces. Let's say the bishop goes to e4, there might be some play on this long diagonal. The knight might jump into b4, and long story short, this position does not seem all that clear. White might be a little better, queen c3, bishop e4, but there's still a lot of complicated play ahead. Instead, they get this ending, which I mentioned after the queen exchange, and here, if black were to keep his 2 bishops, maybe things would be okay, but white has another very strong move, knight c6, double attack against e7 and a5. All black can do is go bishop d8, parting with the bishop, and now that the bishop pair is cut in half after knight d8, rook d8, white should have a pretty significant, if not winning, advantage. with his 2 pawns and a rook against 2 uncoordinated minor pieces. Eljanov is a great endgame player. He takes it slow. He goes f3 and sometimes preparing e4 to shut the bishop out of the game, but also clearing the way for the white king to enter the battle. No more queens, so the king is safe. Rook c8, queen, rook to a3, and here the computer indicates that black's best bet was to go rook to b8, trying to occupy this open file immediately before white gets a hold of it. White is still better, but this might have been a better way to stick around rook to b8, rook to d2, and let's say king to f8. Black is still in for a very unpleasant defense after rook a2, followed by rook b2. So maybe the best was the very strange looking move bishop b1, just trying to stop white from occupying the b file. Didn't happen. Instead, bishop to g6 was played, and now just king f2, bringing the king a bit closer to the center, shows he's in no hurry. This is the time Nakamura goes rook b8, but with his bishop committed to g6 after rook d2, it's very hard to fight against this plan of rook a2 followed by rook b2. Maybe the best was still, even at the loss of a tempo, to go bishop b1, but it does look strange. f6 was played. I believe it was accompanied by a draw offer. I'm not sure if that's true. It would be strange because, yeah, white is clearly better, but maybe Nakamura was hoping that Eljanov would be fine, calling it a day and moving on to the next game. But no such thing. It was turned down with rook a2, once again intending to exchange the rooks, which is another important attacking technique in these situations. The second rook is worth less than the first rook, or to put another way, if you only have one rook, you really want to keep it on the board, because if you're dealing with only one rook by the opponent here after rook b2, that rook is free to roam freely and there's not much black can do to defend. Therefore, the rook exchange here would immediately lose. Instead, after rook b2, of course, Nakamura understands and knows all this. He tries to keep the rook on the board and grabs a pawn, but the problem is after rook b5, white picks up the a5 pawn, builds a passer, and should be technically winning, a sentiment Eljanov also expressed about his position even earlier. Nakamura did his best to fight on, muddy the waters, get his bishop out of the pawn chain, play f5 to defend against e4, and maybe securing a square on d5 for the knight. But the problem is this a-pawn is just very powerful. Knights don't like dealing with a-pawns, and it's at the very least going to destruct the black pieces for trying to stop it when it's going to be time for white to move on to different targets. The black king and the g7 pawn very much come to mind. King f8, therefore, also wouldn't have helped much. The king might get involved fighting against the a-pawn, but would still leave the king side alone, and white would manage to activate his rooks and attack the g7 and h6 pawns somewhere down the stretch. Let's say here, I don't know, rook b7, king e8, and I'm not sure actually. My computer gives h3 followed by g4, but I'm not very fond of that plan. I don't really want to exchange pawns. Maybe rook b6 is a more circumspect way to play, tending a6, a7, and if this bishop ever moves, bishop a4 to deal with the pawn, then you activate the second rook, and sooner or later white should overstretch the black defenses. Maybe it was a bad try to centralize the king, but this pawn on g7 does remain a juicy target. So king h7 was played instead, rook b7, rook c4, rook b6, same maneuver, intending to go a6, a7, bishop a4, the bishop rushes back to fight against the a-pawn, a6, bishop c6, a7, bishop to d5. Nakamura has done his utmost to defend this position, and now actually white faces a bit of a challenge because he has to react to the threat of rook a4 followed by rook takes a7. But Eljanov is up to it. Did I say Nakamura? I meant Eljanov. Eljanov is up to it and goes rook a2, parts ways with the d4 pawn because he understands that all that really matters is the activity of his rooks and the life of the a7 pawn to tie up the black forces. Rook takes d4, rook c2, the rook occupies the c file now, just as active, knight a8, and rook a6, the other rook, takes over the job of covering the a7 pawn and the a file against the black rook. I think this is not too bad. Black, after all, has two pieces for only a rook and a pawn, but the activity and the far advanced nature of the pawn on a7 really does make this a decisive advantage. Rook to d1, h4, another move I like. Preparing to gain some space with h5, fixing this weakness on g7 if it should be needed. Also making the black king a little less comfortable there after, imagine h5 and two rooks on the back rank, and then a check on h8 could happen. So Nakamura decides to stop white from going h5. Probably the best move, goes h5 himself. But that has one drawback as well, which we're actually going to see in the game. The g5 square gets very much weakened, and Eljanov wastes no time rushing his king towards that destination. Black can't do anything. He doesn't really have any targets in the white camp. The g3 pawn is not that much of a target because the rook can't keep attacking it. It does have to switch his attention to the queen side as well after rook d6 followed by rook c8. Rook takes d5 as a threat. Therefore, you can't have this rook hanging out on the g-file to stop king g5 full time. Rook c8, this is the situation I was talking about. If black here, for example, goes king g6, then white can just simplify into a winning rook ending with rook d5, ed, rook takes a8. Rook to a1 has to be played in order to stop the rook moving and then queening the pawn. But this is winning for white after king e5. He picks up the, what's the pawn called? The d5 or the f5 pawn. For example, rook a5, just e3, and black is in Zugzwang. His rook has to stay on the a-file. The king can't really move because it has to defend the f5 pawn. And as you can see, can't do that. Therefore, if the rook moves, let's say rook a3, king takes d5, rook still can't leave the a-file, and white wins quite easily by building another passed pawn on the e-file. Long story short, the rook had to go to a1 to keep the game going. Here, rook takes d5 might be winning as well. I think it is actually. It doesn't really change the nature of the position that much. But Eljanov found a more direct way, went king g5 and went for a direct attack against the black king, even parting ways with the pride of his position, the pawn on a7. Rook takes a7, rook d8, threatening checkmate on h8, g6, and as a spectator, armed with a computer, but even without a computer, I think I might have seen this, I'm not sure. I was expecting the game to finish in mate very soon. Let's have a look at the video from this stretch. If I manage to bring it up, this, as usual, is gonna take a little moment. And here we go. Rook d8 has just been played. Nakamura doesn't have anything else but playing g6, but he does take a moment to make sure there's nothing. And after he plays g6 is the moment where Eljanov could have delivered mate. Goes g6, and Eljanov, we can see, has a lot of time on the clock, but doesn't spend much of it. Goes rook h8 check immediately, which to his luck does not spoil the win at all. It is a perfectly good move, and he had anticipated this is winning, therefore he didn't think much. He thought he could have found a very pretty mate. He could have gone king to f6, threatening rook h8 checkmate. The only sensible defense is king h6 in order to block the check with his rook from h7. But here there's a very cute rook h8 check, rook h7, and rook c to g8. And believe it or not, it's mate next move. White is threatening rook takes g6 checkmate, and rook takes h8 is met with rook takes h8, which is also checkmate. Black has no other move. No, g5, well, hg is checkmate, or rook g6, you have a choice. So Eljanov could have saved himself quite some work by going king f6 instead of rook h8, but the good news for him is that this did not spoil his position. After rook takes g6, followed by either rook takes h5 or king takes h5, White is still winning because his army is so coordinated. He does have this passed h-pawn now, and the black king is very weak on the back rank. A lot of ideas with mating attacks with king g5, king f6. Therefore, black cannot really resist here. Nakamura does his very best, tries to activate the knight. Knight b6, king g5, knight c4. But this h-pawn advancing is just a plan that can't be stopped, and it will lead to mating threats very soon, let's say. here. He actually played rook f6 check because he saw a clear-cut win. But okay, let's try to illustrate this with some other line. It's very hard to do because every move I can think of leads to pretty much direct checkmate. Let's say rook b6 and just h6, rook a6 and rook g7 followed by rook h8 checkmate. So there really was not much to do. Knight d6 was the best chance, trying to bring this knight a little closer. But Eljanov spotted a win here and went for it. Rook f6 check. Now if black goes king e8, his king moves even further from the h-pawn. Then it just advances with h6 and the plan rook g7, h7, h8, which would at least cost black a rook. Too much material. Therefore, Nakamura decided to keep his king closer, went king to g8, which was met by rook to d7, and this is the end. There's nothing black can do. If he were to try knight e8, then there's multiple ways for white to win a lot of material. One of them is rook g6 check, followed by rook takes d5, cashing in on this pin. Another one is to just play rook to d8, pinning this knight, bishop c6, and rook takes e6, which is also totally hopeless. Therefore, Hikaru Nakamura decided to call it a day after... Here we see him offering up the hand after rook to d6. Clearly not very thrilled about it, but a fine technical display by Pavel Eljanov, which, yeah, was really a victory out of the opening. Even though it's an unassuming opening, you have to know a lot of details in this Catalan. And I believe that, yeah, the key points were the move bishop h7, which might be too ambitious in this situation. And then after knight e5, black is already in some trouble. I'm not sure. Not going knight a6 and allowing this might have been the best chance. But here, after bishop takes c6, probably his best bet was to keep the queens on the board and fight from this position, even though objectively white might be better here as well. Anyway, that was our game of the day. It means that tomorrow Nakamura, I don't know when you're watching this, in round 2 of the quarterfinals, Nakamura finds himself with his back against the wall, has to win on demand to stay in the World Cup. Many people consider him the big favorite of the players left, but he has his work cut out for him against Pavel Eljanov, or Pavel Eljanov, as our friend Lawrence Trent named him, because he's already won 33 rating points or ELO points during this World Cup. Very impressive tournament for the Ukrainian star so far. Thanks for watching. Check out my upcoming Catalan series on Chess24. Check out the live coverage of the World Cup and all the other good stuff. See you guys there. Bye bye.